The exhibition that is mounted right now is divided into broadly 3 sections. It is called Ellipsis, between word and image, and meaningfully there are 3 divisions which are relating to the archive, one from Jaipur itself of the City Palace Museum. The second one is of a contemporary artist by the name of Nandan Ghia, who lives and works in Jaipur. And the third is excerpted works from a photo editorial that has been running almost for 10 years now, entitled Pics. There are interconnections between these 3 that are trying to be drawn out vis-a-vis the place of contemporary photography, maybe in South Asia right now, and also the place of the archive responding and engaging with the contemporary.
A very important reason for bringing in a big photography exhibition was twofold. One, of course, historically, we've had Ram Singh's archive here at the City Palace. And even before that, or around that time, you had Ghasi Ram and other Natwara painters who took to photography. So it's really a place where a lot of people understand photography and the painted photograph in a very beautiful way.
One of India's pioneering photographers who was active in the 1860s and 1870s was a Maharaja of Jaipur, Maharaja Ram Singh II. He wasn't just a collector like other Maharajas, he was actually a practitioner. And there were a number of people who met him and who recorded this, saying, you know, he's a wonderful, skilled photographer. And it was only in the 1980s the then director and curator of the City Palace Museum opened this store and found this fantastic material, this huge archive of 2,000 glass plate negatives. At the time, there were no such things as enlargements. The negatives are glass plate negatives, and all of the prints that he would have made would have been contact prints. We decided to make them all the same size so that you're seeing them as Sawai Ram Singh's contemporaries would have seen them. They all demand close attention and they all repay close attention. I think it's always interesting to see works of art of different periods juxtaposed because of the way in which they're then encouraged to speak to each other. I think the work of Nandan Ghia is particularly interesting because here is a contemporary practitioner working in Jaipur who's engaged with history. Again, there's a sort of dialogue across the courtyard between Nandan Ghia's take on the late 19th century and Ram Singh's take on it.
When I'm looking at an image, I'm thinking of the possibilities, the things that I might do with it. So rather than seeing the image in its state while I'm acquiring it, I'm already imagining what it might become. These works are like a disjointed, evolving, mutating self. They aren't what they once were. They are based in a certain tradition, in a certain ideology, in a certain iconography, but gathering influences, impressions as times and technologies change.
These are important moments in his reign, in his development of the city that he's engaged with.
This act of evolution is not a stationary state. It's a state of transition. It's a state of constant change. So through the pixelated faces and disjointed frames, I endeavor to capture that change.
One of the things that comes across very strongly in this display is Sawai Ram Singh's work as a copyist. He made photographs of other works of art. It's not just that he's documenting this person or that place. He's exploring what you can do with the camera.
And what pics have brought to the city is looking at a wide spectrum of photographic practices which range from political, personal, urban to environmental.
Quittance for your skies, for my nights, for our trees, for the streets, you will. For Manhattan, for Macau, for Avignon, for Antwerp, I will. For time, for space, for words, for dance, we will.
Something that we're particular about saying is that it's one of the voices from India. The entire foundation of PIX has always been about word and image. The storytelling aspect is very important to the image. The image does tell a story, yes, but it's also what is imagined.
The constant challenge was representation. What gives me the agency or the authority to actually talk about a certain issue, and how best do I talk about it? Every medium has a certain intelligence and a certain kind of approach. It takes the form of how an urban class and an urban population actually is complicit in the erasure of indigenous communities and their knowledge.
After digital came in, people showing different kinds of narratives from different sections of the society.
I have written for Babak's work, which is specific to the idea of masculinity. I imagined the idea of two men being in love who actually have to fight a war the next day.
We talk about a certain time that we live in.
A certain kind of nostalgia and certain kind of memories.
And how are we addressing the time? We cannot escape ourselves, and we cannot escape the time that we live in.
Given the changing times that we have in the country and everything being so prevalent, but I think it's just this feeling more now for the younger artists in particular that, whether it's project-based work or video or, installation, that they're looking for more sort of public spaces, and they're more aware that these are spaces that are now being made available to them.
So this work that I've been documenting for over a decade has been photographed in Alang, which is on the coast of Gujarat in India. It happens to be one of the largest shipbreaking yards in the world. The idea of that space for me personally is the salvage industry, and something which is of waste to someone is wealth to someone else.
I was interested in the idea of how geography informs the psyche and how it shapes people in a certain place where they live.
The way I work, even with the digital media, is very much how I work with the physical material objects in my painting, and the main kind of component there is collage and layering and erasure and kind of destroying it, and I'm a great destroyer of the image. I like taking things apart and putting them together in different configurations, and that process remains the same whether it's the video work, the animation work, the digital work.
I went off on a tangent, started thinking about how strange could the world really have been. That's when I came up with this very strange idea of a horizon, not going from left to right, but going from top to bottom. I was watching a program on Stephen Hawking, and it was a documentary, and it started off with him saying that what if the world was so strange that we could never hope to understand it, and science was wasting its time trying to do so.
Taking such a close look at them kind of expands the view more. It's almost like looking at through a microscope at things so closely that it no longer retains that shape of that vernacular or that local, and it becomes something else, which to my mind is how we look at geographies today.
Disconnect is the big word of our times.
Somewhere we are all peripatetic. There's always an image that is not there. We've always lost something, and maybe we will never find it, but that shouldn't deter us from the search.
There are various subjects that are being dealt with across South Asia. People in Afghanistan are actually responding to some very similar issues to someone sitting in Myanmar. And how is it that there is that similarity that comes through from actually places that are entirely different?
Today's age, where you're flooded with images and everybody thinks they're a photographer, I think it's important to put it out there and really question what photography can be.
In recent years, there's been a revival of serious interest, both scholarly and popular, in pioneering photography in South Asia generally. So we're trying to establish Maharaja Sawai Ram Singh's position in the history of Indian photography.
Image, whether it's moving or the still image, today, where it can be fake, it can be morphed, it can be used, it can be realistic. What is that place?
A romantic idea that I might actually believe in, that the democratization of the medium, which allows a lot of communities to be able to tell stories about themselves, is something that is a real positive, and I have no doubt that it is a positive. However, the articulation of that and the dissemination and the distribution, I'm not entirely sure if that has been figured out.
We all live in what everybody knows as the post-truth world. I think everybody is questioning their sense of what truth is. Thinking about these ideas, I think social documentary in a space is also changing. It has to take in these perspectives of how do you show a subject? Is the most direct fashion the best fashion of showing a subject?
I wanted to kind of map different ways of understanding what photography can be. So, let's look at it from the documentary to the abstract.
A lot of stuff that I wanted to do.
There was no particular direction, but there was a certain kind of aesthetic, and there was a certain kind of world that I kept on building brick by brick.
Several young photographers and several young students across Jaipur and Rajasthan come. And for them to see this kind of work is really quite amazing. It's really an educational thing in itself, as all museum visits are.
There is an appreciation for that, but I think there's lots that we can still do moving ahead, 10 years forward.
This is a point at which Ellipsis, the three nodes, the archive, the contemporary and the institutional, will never actually be in sync with one another, but they have to enamor themselves to understand one another. Is this that global moment at which we can understand each other's perspectives? Or is there something lost in translation that we must appreciate? Maybe that is the poetry, that inscription of fantasy on the rail. That is the ellipsis of time.